we have tried to show that here's what they thought the facts were, here's the discipline they thought was appropriate. But a lot of the information that, as the evidence in this hearing has developed, I did have some questions for some witnesses about it, because I don't believe that it is relevant at all to the board's decision. But since that is something that the other side has alleged, I have to protect my record for some kind of appeal, I have to provide that response evidence. But I don't think it's necessarily relevant to the issue.
Let me say this on that. I'm not suggesting you not put evidence in, but I'm suggesting that if we could talk about it, instead of asking, did you do this, instead of, I guess what I'm suggesting is that you ask really leading questions, or walk the witness through. You know, you did this, you did that, you did that. How did you do that? Or is this different? Don't get, you know, on such and such a date, did you receive information from someone on such and such a date? Did you know, go back and, I think vaguely, Assistant Chief said, go back and review the materials. Did you do that by an open meeting law request or by this request? What difference does it make? He got the materials, right? You understand it? So you can almost go to, on such and such a date, you went, got the materials. Could you tell us why you did it that way? Instead of asking, did you do an open meeting versus do it this way? I'm sorry, public records. Public records. So otherwise, we're going to spend a lot of time on foundational questions we don't need, because the board knows he got those documents. We know, you know, whether he did it one way or the other may or may not be relevant. Don't ask him, you know, which way did you do it? How did you get them? When did you get them? You got them. Do you understand what I'm suggesting?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take my turn. Ms. Day did it yesterday, and maybe I can try to explain it a little bit more from our perspective. So there is a due process requirement in the Peace Officers Bill of Rights for counsel to be able to make our record and to be able to establish certain information. It deprives the appellant in particular, and Ms. Day agrees with this, and this is why we talked and why we put together a schedule. It deprives me of an opportunity to conduct cross-examination. This is the first and only time that I get to speak to Chief Rodbell and Chief Slavin and establish facts for a record that I may need for other purposes. So we appreciate the suggestions by the board as to the things that you guys find most compelling, and we will certainly do that.
Okay.
But I have a legal right to make a record.
That's my point. Don't do what you just did. You make your point and then you go on and keep talking. Stop. Make your point. Is Mr. Sabella correct that he's making a record for things that are not going to be considered by the personal mistake? Okay. And what I said earlier, the only thing that I said earlier I want you to consider is let's get there quickly, unless there's some reason on the review that it has to be expanded and laying foundation in a particular manner. And I don't know, because I don't know how you do this when it goes up to the other appeals. So I just want you to know I'd like you to move along a little quicker than we have in the past. Mr. Vice Chair, do you have any comments?
No, but I have a request with your indulgence and that of council. If I could ask Chief Rodbell 2 questions to start this proceeding, it may alter the course of the day.
It is, Ms. Day, do you have an objection to that?
I have no objection to that.
Mr. Scala, do you have that?
No.
Okay, are we ready to take our first witness?
Yeah.
Sure, please go to the witness table. Please raise your right hand and swear affirm the testimony about to give this trial as the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I did.
Please state your name.
Oh, Alan Rodbell.
Please be seated. Vice Chair, you have a couple questions for the witness?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, sir.
Yesterday, a question was asked of Assistant Chief Prop if he would, I'm paraphrasing, welcome Commander Minor back to the force. I ask you the same question.
Sir, I'm convinced at this point, after reviewing obviously all that I had to review, that we would be sitting in this room if I didn't feel very strongly about whether it was a mistake or intentional, the action taken by Commander Minor during an internal affairs investigation. The city of Scottsdale has no officers currently working on employment that's on the Brady list or in Arizona's Rule 15. I've got to tell you that I have some grave concerns about him being able to return to duty in the city of Scottsdale as a police officer. Any other employment, I don't have any issue with, but in the police department, we take a very strong view, it's one of our values in the city, we take a very strong view on integrity. We have to. Officers sometimes only have their word to offer in a court of law. There's no real evidence that exists. And so understanding that's why consistently officers had either resigned and allowed them to resign, or they had been dismissed from the Scottsdale Police Department on integrity violations. So my answers to that is no, I don't feel as strongly or the way that Chief Pop presented his feelings. Thank you.
No need for my second question. Thank you.
Chief Rodbell is Ms. Days on this.
That's correct.
Please proceed.
Chief Rodbell, you are the chief of the Scottsdale Police Department, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
How long have you held that position?
I've been employed by the city of Scottsdale for almost 19 years, almost 18 years as the police chief.
Can you give us the briefest of sketches of your background and qualifications?
Been doing this for 45 years, and brevity might not be something I'm going to be good at this, depending on which part of my career you're looking for. As I said, I've been a police officer for 45 years. I've been the chief here. I've been a supervisor and above for 37 years as a supervisor and above. Along with running the police department, I'm on about presently maybe 9 boards and commissions, 2 appointed by the governor, 1 appointed by the state's attorney general. I am a member of the Arizona Post Board. I was asked to be the chair of the Arizona Post Board because of my pending retirement. I turned that opportunity down. I'm a member of the Central Regional Area Council, which looks at the WASI grants, determined where federal grants will be delegated to departments. I'm a member of the Peace Officer Memorial Board. I've been a member of the NAACP for well over 25 years, including time prior to coming to Scottsdale. I've been an advisory board member there 50 years. I'm a member of a group called Health World International that deals with children's programs, health education.
Chief Rodbell, for time, I think I'll stop you right there.
Cut me off.
You mentioned that you are on the board of AZPOST. Can you describe what that is for us?
Okay, so the Arizona Post Board is the state board that looks at, it is actually the board that protects the integrity and professionalism of law enforcement throughout the state. So they set the standards for training and standards for behavior. An officer that is hired into law enforcement must have the qualifications. They set the qualifications. They set the minimum training standards to both become a police officer and to maintain certification, and they monitor that certification. So when officers are brought upon very serious allegations of misconduct, the board that I sit on actually review those throughout the state to determine whether or not it should impact the officer's certification. Officers can only police if they're certified to police, much like lawyers have bar, police officers have AZPOST.
So, for example, if someone is disbarred in the eyes of the bar, they can't practice an attorney. If someone is decertified by the post, they cannot practice as a peace officer in Arizona.
That is correct, yes.
And you have been, you said, a board member of AZPOST
Yes, ma'am.
for how many years?
Maybe getting close to 7 years now.
And in your capacity as a board member of AZPOST, have you had the opportunity to review integrity violations for many officers for many different departments around the state?
Yes, I am.
So evaluating integrity violations is something you're extremely familiar with, is that right?
Yes, I am.
And you do that not just for the city of Scottsdale, but for the entirety of the state?
Well, if the city of Scottsdale case for any nexus to the city of Scottsdale comes up on the board, I recuse myself from
Your understanding of why we are here in this personnel board hearing is to talk only about the discipline that was imposed on Commander Minor, is that right?
it. That's correct.
And AZPOST, when it makes a certification decision, that is subject to a separate hearing office done by a separate body, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the integrity violation that the city sustained against Commander Minor, that was reported to AZPOST, was it not?
As is required, yes.
And is that a state law requirement that a sustained integrity violation be reported to Post?
Yes, ma'am.
Every department, every sustained integrity violation is reported to Post?
They should, yes.
So, are you aware of what the status is of the AZPOST hearing process for Commander Minor, if there's one?
I am not. With the person that was responsible for bringing that before the board, unfortunately took very ill. It was hospitalized. And it was given to another investigator, and I haven't asked where it's at. I just know it was changed to a different investigator, which has been part of the play.
We've had some questions in this hearing about your department and the character of the department that you run. So I'd like to ask you some questions about that. One of the city values that's mentioned in Commander Minor's termination notice is the city value of be accountable and act with integrity. Can you speak to that city value and how that is put into practice in your department?
So the city values have been city values for maybe a decade at this point, maybe longer. They're on the wall in all of our buildings, and they basically, and at one time and I think currently now we've gone back to our actual valuations are actually written out with city values. And so we reinforce those city values and everything we do. As you mentioned, one of them is active integrity. But I do believe the police department has always held its employees to even a much higher level of active integrity in regard to how we deal with violations of the law. You can be in some departments and maybe perhaps commit some offenses and the violation would not necessitate dismissal. But with the police department, it's different. But we do use the C values in our evaluation system, and we do adhere to the best day. We hold people accountable to adhere to them.
In your view, when you order an investigation, whether formal or informal for an employee, is that consistent with the city value of acting with integrity?
So the question was, when I order it?
The question was when the department does an investigation of someone, whatever the kind of investigation, is that generally intended to be punitive, or is that related to city values or accountability? Can you explain that for me?
No. In fact, I say this all the time. So we don't look at discipline as punitive. We look at discipline as correcting behavior. And when you look at discipline as correcting behavior, you're looking not to make examples out of people. You're looking to send messages to the organization that this is what's acceptable in terms of employee behavior. Unfortunately, because of we're police officers and we testify in court, and truthfulness and honesty is important to our community, to ourselves. We sometimes don't do just corrective behavior. Sometimes there has to be separation. And it happens sometimes in use the word minor, but I don't mean Mr. Minor. Sometimes we use it what you might consider very small, I think the term yesterday was white lies, but it's still an integrity issue. And so sometimes we hold our people accountable. I hold myself accountable.
Have you ever self-reported a disciplinary violation?
I did. Several times. Well, a couple times. Well, one time self-report. I guess the accident was called the police. So, yes, early on in my career, I took a gun into the jail. I thought there was a good reason to do it. I was reminded by someone it was a violation. I immediately had an internal affairs investigation open on me. I was found sustained, and I was disciplined.
There are different levels of investigations that can be done in the department, just generally. There might be, depending on if it's a workplace infraction, what the infraction was, there could be a supervisor review. Things can be referred to HR for investigation. Things can be referred to IA for investigation. There are different boards that look at use of force, accident review, many kinds of investigations for that. And the department does sometimes do criminal investigations of its own officers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is your practice as a department to try to do the type of investigation that is warranted by whatever is the situation that comes to your attention?
Out of all that, I would prefer a supervisor dealing with issues at the level that they operate. I would much prefer correction being taken by first-line supervisors than having anything elevate to a higher level, such as a formal internal affairs investigation. And certainly, we want to avoid criminal investigations by making sure that things are done properly at the street level when incidents occur, so that they don't get they rise the level of actual criminal investigation. That's terribly difficult for a police department to go through, and my employees to go through when they haven't done anything wrong. So to your point, I think probably what I would prefer out of all that, it's all true, but what I would prefer out of all that is first-line supervisors actually dealing with things at the inception.
You did recently order, within the last year and a half, a criminal investigation of 2 of your officers. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And is that related to the dog biting case that we've been talking about intermittently throughout this year?
Yes, it was a use of force case.
You mentioned that that investigation is something, as with any criminal investigation of an officer, something that's difficult for the department to go through. Do you agree
Yes.
with that?
So, I don't know if we're going to talk about the case or just that point.
Just the effect of that investigation on the department overall, morale, the dynamic, if you're aware.
Yes, so as you can imagine, when some officer is being looked at for criminal misconduct to be reviewed, they are suspended with a pending the investigation. And as you can imagine, the stress level for that, the message sent about the organization that you were investigating our own criminal matter. So to your point, yes, it's extremely stressful, and I can appreciate what the officers went through. But it was important for us as a police department, important for our community to thoroughly investigate that and make sure our officers didn't do any criminal misconduct. So it's important, but it's extremely stressful. And I'm proud to say and happy to say that at the end of things, it ended up being a court writing issue and some other minor issues as opposed to anything that was criminal.
Near the other end of the spectrum, we've talked about supervisors handling issues with respect to workplace issues or disputes or misconduct. And we have talked at length, and I'll just ask you briefly, about a situation that you handled with respect to Assistant Chief Slavin. Can you explain, because there's been some suggestion that handling has some kind of nefarious meaning, what you mean when you say that you handled the Slavin investigation?
So as I mentioned, I've been a supervisor for 37 years. I've had lots of opportunities for employees to come and self-report some violation. And I'm not going to minimize what Chief Slavin did. He did something unacceptable and inappropriate. And certainly did demonstrate professionalism and leadership. And so when he came in to self-report, and I hope I answered your question, when he came in to self-report, I felt as though I had an employee come in and tell me, as I had at every level of my career, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, major, bureau chief, assistant chief, deputy chief, chief, people have come in and have said, I messed up, I did something I shouldn't have done, and here it is. And I felt that he was contrite enough and certainly bothered enough and concerned enough and upset enough that I don't usually beat up on my employees, but I made it very clear how disappointed I was and how unacceptable his behavior was and how he demonstrated a very poor judgment and clearly didn't demonstrate leadership. And I felt that I had, I'll use the word handled, and I know this means handling. It was dealt with immediately. It's what I expect of my supervisors to do with their employees, so I certainly hold myself that same standard. I could have, I guess, said, don't talk to me, he's got almost on some Bill of Rights, don't tell me anything. We're gonna call HR, we're gonna open up an HR investigation. And an HR investigation, those folks are busy, an HR investigation doesn't get done overnight. And so we could have waited weeks, months perhaps, for me to be able to
Excuse me, I
say,
apologize for interrupting you. But you said we dealt with it. Can you tell us what you did? What you could have done, maybe
Sure.
it's necessary to be asked, but you know we have limited time, we have a number of witnesses to go through. So you said you dealt with it, that's a conclusion. Tell us what exactly you did with regard to Chief Slavin when he came into your office. As you remember.
so I counseled him.
Well, what
Okay,
did
did I-
you, counseling is a conclusion.
Okay, well, that's actually what I did, sir, but okay.
What did he say to you? What did he say to you?
I had my name CC'd on a copy of the email that went out, and I notated his behavior and his performance evaluation.
Well, the email went out after he spoke to you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, what did he, when he first came in, what did he say to you, what did you say to him? And what the back and forth was.
Okay. You want that, sir?
Yes,
Okay,
that's
so
what
he
the
said-
important issue is here.
Okay.
Thank you.
He said to me that, that it came to his attention, because at first he didn't remember what he said. He knew that he was in a meeting. He knew he had tried to lighten up the mood. He knew he had said something that did not go over as well as he had hoped it would go, something funny. It was brought to his attention that it was inappropriate and offensive to some. He was reminded of what he didn't remember at first, but he was reminded by the lieutenant he spoke to of what he had said. And he was upset, concerned, and immediately came in to see me to tell me about it. It was early in the morning, I was sitting in my conference table doing filing, and he told me that he had, and I'm not being clear exactly, because I don't know this particular newspaper, but he told me that he was talking about an event, terrorism event, that he was, mentioned something and said, what's the name of that paper? And something along the lines of, it's the gay newspaper, or the editor is gay, and someone told him, later on identified as Tom Myers, told him the name of the paper, and he said, you know the name of the paper, you must be gay, why are you gay? And then I went on and let him know how I felt about his behavior.
And what did you tell him?
Well, I'm not going to be able to go verbatim, but I let him know I was disappointed in his behavior, and that wasn't something I expected from somebody at his level. And I was surprised, and that it can never happen again. And that we then discussed the writing of an apology. And I directed him to put my name on it as a CC, so everyone involved knew that I was aware. And then I eventually made a notation, and the notation ended up in his performance evaluation. Which was done at the end of July.
Ms. Davis?
At any point in the conversation that you had with Chief Slavin, did either of you laugh?
There's nothing funny about this. Disappointing.
Was it a serious conversation, a heavy conversation?
Oh, yes. Started out heavy, got heavier.
We've asked some of the witnesses about appearance, tone, demeanor, and answering questions. And you've had a chance as an officer to evaluate people's body language, demeanor for indicia of their your frame of mind when you do an interrogation, for example. Did you draw any conclusions about Chief Slavin's emotional state or feelings based on your observation of his demeanor when you spoke?
He was very troubled, he was very disappointed in himself, but he was very sincere. And he has been that way ever since. He still thinks about this work. It still bothers him.
And you mentioned that you did keep track of the fact that you had had this discussion and this counseling.
Yes, and of his performance evaluation.
His annual review that's maintained in his personnel file and available for reference to any future supervisors, for example.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Counsel, again, he's giving conclusions. Does he know what he wrote, what is written in that performance evaluation?
Do you know what you wrote in the evaluation?
I do not recall the exact wording of the document, I'm sure the document.
What do you remember?
But I do remember it was in the section that dealt with professionalism, and I do remember it was notating the date, the information about when it occurred, what occurred.
Oh, what was the one that occurred?
So I don't remember, yeah.
Did you mention that he made a homophobic comment?
And I use the word homophobic, and I don't use the word homophobic because
Okay, but you didn't use that word, what word do you think you did use?
inappropriate.
Okay, so you made no reference that you raised the question of sex discrimination or reference to someone specific, just broadly inappropriate comments.
Performance evaluation. Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry, mistake, please continue. And again, those are the types of questions, I'd like to get answers to, specific, what he said, what he wrote, what happened, not, well, I went this and I made this and I did that. Well, that's actually what I want. Not, I counseled him. That was the question. What was it? That's a broad question. So let's get down to specifics. Thank you. I apologize if I made you.
Chief Rodbell, you can try to keep that guidance in mind. That'll help us get through this. In addition to the comment that was made in Chief Slavin's performance evaluation, did that event impact the numerical or category rating that he received that year for professionalism on his evaluation?
Seeing the answer is yes.
I'd like to turn to the termination notice so that we can talk a little bit more specifically about Commander Minor's situation that we're here for. You could refer, it is one of the city exhibits in the notebook in front of you.
Volume 1 or 2?
I believe it is volume 2. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Okay, I'm sorry, I misspoke. The notice of pre-termination hearing, base number 2947, that's the first document behind tab number 8. Chief Rodbell, are you there?
I believe so, yes.
Commander Minor had a pre-termination hearing in this case, and the fact that he had it is not part of the issue in this case by stipulation. But I set forth all of the reasons why Commander Minor was terminated from the city?
It does, yes.
And does it reference the legal standards that the city applied in making that termination decision?
Yes, it does.
We've talked a lot about AR 333, but we have not really talked about the actual legal standards themselves that the city used when making the termination decision. So I will ask you a few questions about that. Following the pre-termination hearing, the city did decide to go forward and terminate Commander Minor, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's your decision?
That's correct.
Did you decide to terminate following that hearing based on all of the reasons in this document?
Yes, I did.
I don't want to sit here and ask you to go through Commander Minor's transcripts of his interviews line by line, or his statement in writing that he gave to the interviewers from Internal Affairs line by line, or the email that he sent to Chief Slavin line by line. But before you made the decision to terminate Commander Minor, did you know that?
I don't know. The only one I'm questioning is when you said the email sent from Commander Minor to
Oh,
Chief Slavin.
I apologize.
That is okay.
Okay, I mistaken. So, you received a report from your internal affairs investigators,
That's correct.
and you saw that they had decided to sustain an integrity violation against Commander Minor, is that right?
That is correct.
You, as police chief, had the power to overrule their determination if you felt that that was warranted or necessary, or if you felt that they had reached the wrong conclusions. Is that correct?
I do, yes.
So there's no need for you to influence or shade an investigation. As chief, you can make your own independent determination. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you, upon your review of the investigator proposal of the sustained violation, did you conduct a thorough review of all of the documents related to that?
No, it's a very serious case, absolutely.
And in the end, you concluded that there was sufficient grounds to sustain an integrity violation, is that right?
I did, yes.
Was your decision to sustain an integrity violation based solely on the two answers to questions regarding, quote, directly offended?
I came to the same conclusions as the IA investigators came to, so I did focus on Mr. Minor to answer the case.
The investigators noted a number of issues that in their report states that it did not rise to the level of truthful or complete answers. Are you aware of it generally?
Yes, I am.
Do you disagree with any of the conclusions that the investigators came to regarding Commander Minor's integrity or misconduct that's noted in their report? And again, you reviewed the entirety of both transcripts line by line before you made a determination to approve the sustained integrity violation, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And you also reviewed Commander Minor's written submission that he gave to the investigators, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Police General Order 1411 provides that employee actions may be ground for dismissal when the investigation relates to on-duty conduct or off-duty conduct that adversely affects the operation of the department and the employee fails to comply or refuses to answer truthfully and completely. Is that your understanding of the policy that applies in the city of Scottsdale to officers?
That is my understanding.
Does the city of Scottsdale apply that policy in an even-handed fashion against every officer?
Yes, in fact, we have checks and balances in place to ensure that.
What are those?
We meet with HR and legal, and we openly discuss cases and appropriate discipline. It does allow me to understand what's going on, not just in the department, but in the city, so I'm fair and consistent.
Fairness and consistency are important to you.
Very.
There's another general order that provides grounds for the dismissal of Commander Minor, and I'm referring to General Order 2503. To save time flipping pages, I'll tell you General Order 2503 defines what constitutes misconduct in the city of Scottsdale. Is it true that in this case there were 3 separate grounds for misconduct with respect to Commander Minor's situation?
I don't have them in front of me for the 3, so.
I'll have you turn the page.
Okay.
There's an excerpt from the record, and I'll represent
Sorry.
you if that's correct. That's a correct quotation from the general order.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Based on your detailed review of line by line the investigatory transcripts and statements and email that Commander Minor sent to investigators following his first interview, did you make a determination that in your professional opinion, Commander Minor failed to accurately report all facts pertaining to an investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
We've talked a lot about the fact that Lieutenant Bonnet approached Commander Minor in his capacity as supervisor to lodge an AR-333 complaint. Is that a fact that is pertinent to a matter of concern to the department? And I'll re-ask the question if it was badly worded. Commander Minor was asked questions about offense during his initial interview with Internal Affairs. And we have talked about not just truthful answers to questions, but General Order 2503 seems to impose an affirmative obligation to volunteer information so that the department has all facts pertaining to an investigation. Do you see that?
I believe that would be accurately presenting the facts.
Okay. All facts, according to the policy. So it's not just in a court of law whether someone who is testifying in a deposition, for example, answers a question, but is it your understanding that General Order 2503 requires a different standard of affirmatively offering all facts if there is a matter that's under investigation and the officer is called in to speak about that investigation?
Yes, ma'am, that's my understanding.
In addition to the investigation piece, General Order 2503 also talks about any other matter of concern to the department. Do you see that in policy?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Is supervision of employees a matter of concern to the department?
Yes, ma'am.
If a direct report is making a AR-333 claim or violation or complaint to his supervisor, is that a matter of concern to the department?
Yes, ma'am.
And if that concern is relayed and elevated up the chain of command to the assistant chief level, is that a matter of concern to the department?
Yes, ma'am.
General Order 2503 talks about a failure to accurately report facts, but it also contains a separate requirement to honestly report all facts. Do you see that?
I do.
In your expert opinion as chief and as member of AZPOST that reviews general orders and integrity policies for departments throughout the state, does this policy require any kind of motive to be sustained?
No, it does not.
General Order 2503 includes a separate count of misconduct for relating a false, deceptive, or misleading account of an incident or fact at issue in an investigation or matter of concern. Do you see that?
I do.
Is it your expert professional opinion, as someone who reviews these types of things for Scottsdale and for the state? Did Commander Minor relate a misleading account of the incident?
I think he did, yes.
Did Commander Minor relate a misleading account of a matter of concern to the department?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you expect Commander Minor, as someone with background in internal affairs, to understand the general orders relating to employee misconduct and officers' obligations to be forthcoming with that material?
Yes, I would.
And this general order does not apply to all employees of the city of Scottsdale, does it?
This general does not apply to all employees, because this is a police department general order. Yes.
This is different than the typical employment case because police officers are held to much different standards than general city employees.
That is correct.
We have heard some testimony about Lieutenant Bonnet and his subjective feelings. We have also heard some testimony and some criticism regarding the actions of the internal affairs investigators, specifically that they did not interview Chief Hop. Do you recall that testimony generally?
Yes, I do.
You have a policy of giving your internal affairs investigators a blank slate when they get something so that they can follow where the facts lead. Would that be a fair description of your approach?
I don't know what I call it blank slate. I do believe that I would criticize if I gave some direction other than procedural direction or asking the investigation to be completed. Everything I knew, for the most part, was hearsay, and I thought it was best that they get the best evidence and have a conversation and find out themselves. I would be secretly criticized for being involved or really involved if I did anything differently. I made the decision to just give them the case and have them go where they felt they needed to go to develop the facts and investigate completely fairly.
Is that an ad hoc policy of something that you did just for this late investigation?
You know, I've been doing this for a long time. I don't know. I've never given a case of internal affairs and said, this guy did it. I want found guilty. I want a case on my desk stating. I'm going to give you that direction. I would is appropriate.
That would undermine some of the ability of IA to serve as an accountability or function or outside set of eyes. Would you agree with that?
That's good.
Commander Minor is a former IA investigator in your department, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Commander Minor knows that that is your policy or should have known in your opinion.
Should yes.
Had Commander Minor, strike that, let the investigator testimony stand for itself. You understand that the investigators were not aware that Chief Pomp had any connection to this incident or the fallout from this incident. You're aware of that?
The chief had
Well, Chief Pomp was not interviewed. And the investigators have been criticized in this proceeding for not interviewing Chief Pomp. Is that right?
That's correct.
In your view of the facts of the situation, if Commander Minor had been forthcoming and volunteered that information regarding his discussions with Chief Pomp, is that something that you would expect investigators to follow up on?
It would depend. Chief Hogg was the recipient of the complaint. He was not a witness to the event. So they may have gotten Aaron Minor's demeanor coming in and making the complaint, how he but he wouldn't necessarily be able to talk about the complaint itself, because he wasn't a witness to the complaint. But how he received the complaint, and that was important to the investigation to show chronologically how it became a complaint and then an investigation, that would be appropriate.
I ask you that because there has been some allegations in some of the written papers that a failure to accurately report all of the facts or be forthcoming might not have been material, and that therefore it should be overlooked, or if it's a white lie. Can you talk about that argument in terms of General Order 2503?
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to explain that to me a little bit.
Let me ask, does General Order 2503 make any provision for an officer to be able to omit facts if it turns out that those facts weren't necessarily material?
Yeah, it would depend on how you found that out. So the question was asked, and it wasn't answered, but they almost found out that something should have been answered. Doesn't matter if it's material or not. So it would depend. That makes sense.
Okay. My question, and I apologize, I'm trying to lead you, and we're not on the same page. Does General Order 2503 discuss the word materiality, at least as it applies to the parts of General Order that were used in this case to sustain the discipline?
It talks the point of giving the information necessary to conduct a thorough, complete, and fair investigation. Yes.
And in this case, the expert witness put forth by Commander Minor, I believe, criticized the investigators for not conducting interviews with Chief Rodbell. Had Commander Minor volunteered that information to the investigators, I think they testified that they would have investigated Chief Rodbell. Do you remember Sergeant Goldhart testifying to that?
Yes, and I do believe that part is true. If in fact there was something that a minor making a complaint actually thought, the witness actually thought Chief Hogg had acted in the investigation, they should have brought Chief Hogg into the investigation. In that regard, that is true, yes.
So, as part of the analysis of the situation, we should consider then that Commander Minor's failure to affirmatively provide this information regarding the conversation with Chief Hogg did change the investigation that occurred.
It could have impact, yes.
Specifically with regard to the written statement that Commander Minor made, I will tell you that on one of his slides regarding directly offended, there's a quote that says, multiple individuals expressed concern. No one in particular stood out. Are you familiar with that statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And that statement was part of what was a sustained violation as far as the IA investigators determined, is that right?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And that was part of your own review of the records before you decided to approve or finalize the IA report, is that right?
That is correct.
Did you make a determination of whether that statement is accurate or misleading?
This is the statement by Commander Minor.
The statement by Commander Minor that with respect to offense, multiple individuals expressed concern and no one in particular stood out.
Not only is that inaccurate, but it also misleads the investigator away from who he needs to interview. First and foremost,
You've heard testimony from others regarding Commander Minor's close that night that he was emotional in his interview. You have, through your role as chief of department, you have an understanding of whether Commander Minor had a friendship or relationship with Lieutenant Bonner, based on your own independent observation, is that right?
Actually, I don't know. The answer to that is before or after this. Clearly, I now know. I'm not too sure I know what everyone's relationships are within the organization at those ranks. I may have known that they were friendly friends, but I don't. We never socialized together.
Again, we have some time limits here.
Sorry.
And answers such as, I don't know if I knew then, but I know it now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Proceed.
Do you remember testimony from former Lieutenant Palapoli yesterday that she felt that she may have been targeted by Chief Slayton's comments?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall statements from Commander Minor in his presentation that he gave that he thought that he was standing up for Palapoli?
I do recall it, yes.
At the time that Commander Minor interviewed the IA the first time, he would have had some information about the context that Lieutenant Palapoli described for us, specifically that she had been a topic of discussion immediately before Chief Slavin had made the gay comments. Do you recall that testimony?
I recall it as an incident she was involved in was a topic of discussion, not her division. That's how I heard it.
Lieutenant Palapoli told us, though, that she felt that that contact might have been something that was related and should have been looked into.
So I did hear that.
Commander Minor was aware of that context that Lieutenant Bowles described for us as he was present at the meeting and heard the preceding discussion.
That's my understanding, yes.
Is that something that Commander Minor should have brought to the attention, that additional context that he was aware of, and a possible connection with Lieutenant Palapoli?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And my recollection is Commander Minor did not mention anything about context or potential targeting for Lieutenant Palapoli in his first interview that day, did he not?
I do not recall seeing her name in the first interview. That's correct.
And Lieutenant Palapoli told us IA did not in fact interview her, and in her opinion, as Commander Minor's expert, she thought that they should have. Do you remember that testimony?
That is my understanding, yes.
I'd like to talk to you overall about your personal history with Aaron Minor with the Virginia Department. How long have you known Aaron Minor?
You know, I've again been here 19 years. He was a deputy chief in charge of investigations. I'm not sure Aaron was one of my investigators or not. I think he did the first time we met. Both we worked together. He was my IA sergeant. I've known him twice in his career.
Were there occasions when you chose to promote Commander Minor, whatever during the time, were there occasions where you chose to promote Aaron Minor over and above Rich Slavin when they were both interviewing or were attempting to get the same job?
My recollection, I promoted the commander prior to promoting the commander. Chief Slayton, the commander.
And do you remember the reasons for promoting Aaron Minor over Rich Slavin at the command level?
Well, we have processes, not just up to me, but I do get input from the processes. I do make the decision ultimately. I don't remember exactly what the process, because I've changed processes based upon where we are as an organization. So I don't remember what process they went through at the commander rank. But I do know there's a process that people go through, the review process, and then decisions made. At the time, I thought Aaron Minor was better prepared to be a commander, and it was the best choice and the best fit for the organization. So I promoted Aaron over Chief Slavin.
At some point, both Commander Minor and then Commander Slavin were put into process for the assistant chief position. Did you have input on the decision to choose Chief Slavin for the promotion?
Well, ultimately, it was my decision. So that process, if I remember correctly, I had two assistant chiefs, and they did the interviews, and then I met with them, and we had a conversation about readiness. During that process, Chief Slavin came out as most prepared, most ready to move into the chief's rank. So it's all based on experience, it's based on processes, it's based on accomplishments, skill sets, and so that I promoted Chief Slavin.
Other than resume or background information, as far as readiness, was there anything else that went into your decision to select Chief Slavin over Commander Minor for that promotion?
Other than those items, those to be different ways. Yeah.
As chief, is one of the things that you do in leading your department to make attempts to develop the careers of the officers that work under you?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Seriously, take that.
Can you describe what that is for us, please?
How we prepare people.
How you take steps to help your officers develop their careers?
So we do an amazing job at this. It's not all my doing. We have literally opened our doors at all levels of the organization, and anybody that wants to get on our calendars into simply making an appointment, rather thinking about promotion or career. The only time we stop that is once we announce a process, because we don't want any indication that we may say something, because we may have some inside information into what the process is and the questions are going to be asked. But we are open all the time to have officers and employees of any rank come into our office and talk to us about their careers. Our sergeants are encouraged to know what their officers are looking for in their career, opportunities, changes in assignment, rank, attainment, more responsibilities. And we also look for opportunities to expose our employees to opportunities to grow on values, learn and grow continuously. So we have been doing this since I got here. We have developed leadership programs. One of the things, when I got here, I came from the outside, so I felt we need to develop our internal strength. And so we do a lot of mentoring, but people have to want it. People have to have it. They have to get on my calendar, I'll put it on my calendar. Although one time I took all lieutenants, and Aaron may have been a lieutenant at that time, I met with all lieutenants over coffee, lunch, or breakfast, and talked about them and their career, asked them to read their resume, we looked at their resume, talked about blind spots, things they need to do, and kind of make themselves more rounded, well-rounded. I'm very proud of what we do and how far we're doing mentoring with all our employees.
When Commander Minor was not selected for promotion to assistant chief, did you have some thought or take some action regarding helping Commander Minor develop so that the next time an assistant chief position came up, he might be more ready?
I did do some things. In fact, I felt Aaron had great comments, but he had some blind spots that we're going to have to deal with in terms of like experiences and skill sets. And so on at least 2 occasions, I approached Aaron to be on my calendar and never took advantage of that. And that's his choice. I didn't downgrade somebody for not wanting to see me. That's not part of the process. Did you see everybody? That's the process. But I did look for some things we could do. So I met with Chief Rodbell, and I said, what can we do to give Aaron some experiences that will help prepare for the next process? And so there were 3 things we did that I can think of offhand. One was we had a national conference coming here. Helen and Chief Rodbell had a national conference that she got to come to Scottsdale, which was something that we had to compete for, not to pay for, but to compete to have them come here. Demonstrate we were the best place to have this conference. International Association of Chiefs of Police. It was dealing with youth issues. One of my focuses is that we would not think in terms of youth issues. We need to develop that. I invited Aaron to attend with us as part of that. Aaron did attend. I took copious notes and I focused on, I think, 3 things I thought we could work on the next year. And assigned Aaron to bring that into the strategic planning process. I don't know what became of that. None of that is accomplished. The second thing I did was, maybe I have an order, I don't know what. Aaron was in charge of the Open. So the Open is the largest spectator down the PGA circuit. 600,000 people come to the Open. And Aaron was responsible for the Open, and I had an idea that I wanted to create 2 videotapes. And one videotape was I wanted to do a small video for the community consumption on how public safety prepares for and puts on the Open. And the other one was a much larger, a longer production that would be law enforcement sensitive, that would demonstrate to other agencies that might be interested in doing something like this in their community, how we do it. And so I had talked to the PGA, gotten their permission. I talked to the Thunderbirds, and gotten their permission. I talked to the city, and gotten the permission. And I went to Aaron, because he was in charge of the Open, and said, I'd like to have this done. I don't recall ever having a meeting on it. Didn't go any further, although I think at one point I was told, I was given some reasons why it couldn't be done, and it never happened. So the third thing was my SMART goals. So everybody in the city has SMART goals that they're supposed to achieve in the course of the year. And because of what was going on around the country, because quite frankly it's a good thing to do, I felt as though I needed to do some implicit bias training with the Departmental. And so Aaron was given the lead on developing implicit bias. And we already looked, Chief Bedard and I already looked at some vendors and producers of training the country. We already focused. It was pretty much done. But the need was to do the logistics behind it, to make it happen. And Aaron was given that assignment. Now, all these things, I don't deal with Aaron on. These are performance issues. And so Chief Hop was his immediate supervisor. I simply made assignments in hopes to develop him in his career and prepare him for the deputy chief position, because quite frankly, I thought he was destined to be at that level one day. And so I don't have any real recollection of what happened and why it went south and never occurred, but these things never came about. The implicit bias is going on. It did come about because other people stood up and said, I'll take it and make it happen. And it's happening as we speak.
And just to clarify, the reason that you selected those particular projects were to beef up some shortcomings in Commander Minor's resume to help him promote to the next level.
I wouldn't call them shortcomings, because shortcomings sounds kind of critical. I think there were opportunities for him to grow and develop skill sets that we sort of identified through the process that he might be benefiting from. So those are all actions I took as a result of his not being promoted. And by the way, I do things for other people too, being fair. This is specifically there.
Just to make sure that we have it for the board and for the record, the department does put on diversity training, is that right?
That's correct.
Is that a priority to the city and to the department?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And are you aware of specific trainings and things that have been offered to department officers over the last few years?
Because HR is really good about giving us opportunities to expand our knowledge and cultures in other communities, and so I'll just take advantage of that.
My understanding is that in the last 5 years, there have been specific diversity trainings involving the Me Too movement, inspired sexual harassment, Islamophobia, diversity beyond race and gender, transgender-focused diversity, it's all a separate seminars. Is that your understanding of trainings that have been offered?
Yes, 2 of those were our initiation and partnership with HR, and the others were HR initiated. Yes.
But those are diversity trainings that have been offered by the city to police department employees?
That is correct, yes.
I heard some testimony from Chief Pop yesterday about his attendance at some diversity trainings. Did you have occasion to review Chief Pop's training record before you came to testify today?
Yes, I was concerned with the testimony because I think he forgot some things. So I did look at his training record, yes.
Okay. And do you recall about how many trainings Chief Pop attended related to diversity in the last
I believe there were 5.
Chief, you mentioned bias training
Yes, sir.
and diversity training. Are those the same thing to you?
I think that actually the one title actually combines both of them in there, but we did implicit bias training. We're in the process of doing implicit bias training. So diversity training has been done other ways as well, but I think when we talk about bias, we're talking a little bit about diversity as well.
So there's overlap, but.
There's over, I think that's the right answer.
Thank you.
Chief, I have to ask you because it's been alleged, do you have any racial bias against Aaron Minor?
Absolutely not.
Do you have any retaliatory bias against Commander Minor for going and speaking with Chief Pop about the AR-333 complaint?
Absolutely not. In fact, I agree with his concerns. I took immediate action.
We have heard some testimony about some meetings that you had with Commander Minor following his suspension and during the process of the IA before the investigation was finalized. And I'll let the record speak for itself as far as the timeline of this year and all that. My question to you is, we reach a point in time where the concerns about Commander Minor's integrity have reached you. And you did not have very much direct one-on-one contact with Commander Minor after that happened, when it was in the when it was in the investigation process, or after Commander Minor was administratively suspended. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. There were some conversations. You had showed him some documents and asked him to help you figure out what your options are, or some talk about options. And again, we have that in the transcripts and records, and we'll let that speak for itself. My question to you is, what was your intention when you were having those conversations with Commander Minor?
You know, my intention was not to, at that time, be the investigator. My intention was to show, and I thought it was a good thing to do. I literally showed Aaron what my concern was. Did not ask Aaron questions about my concern. I said, I'm going to show you something that as a result of, I don't think I have any other option but to conduct an internal affairs investigation into misstating false statements, integrity. I said, so I'm going to let you look at this. And it was highlighted the section I was mostly concerned about. So I'm going to let you look at this. I'll leave the room, let you look at this. And when you're ready, call me back. He did. I said, Aaron, I said, I've got some concerns here. Can you tell, I think I need to open up an internal affairs investigation and tell truthful statements. Can you think of any other alternative that is available to me? I didn't ask him, did he do it? Didn't ask him to tell me the story. I'm just well aware of this, well aware of any illegal PR rights. I said, can you just tell me what actions I can take? And he said, I can't think of it. Because I was concerned about the fact I didn't think he realized the seriousness of what we were talking about. I gave him, it was exactly 24 hours, but it was the next day, to reach out and speak to someone about this, and then come back and see me. Aaron called, I understand, IA sometime in the evening, asked for more time. They asked me, can you have more time? I said, absolutely. And then he came in earlier than the original time, and said he could make a condition. So that's what the open investigation.
And again, my question, and I'm not sure, I'm sure we probably reached there, but I appreciate the information, was what was your intention or what was your hope going into that conversation?
I guess my intention and hope was Aaron would see that, that something was, that he breached about considered integrity violation, and that he had some other alternative method how to remedy the situation he was in. What were his options? There was a multitude of options he had at the time, and I guess I was hoping he would take one of those options.
You did not want to be here today.
Absolutely not. I don't want to be in this situation. And I know that this man's career is imbalanced here. This is very important to this man. I don't take this lightly. I felt there was probably an option that was best, given the circumstances. But I certainly didn't tell him I expected him to do.
I think I'll hold
Yes,
on.
Mr. Chair. I do apologize for the interruption. We're receiving some messages, it's a little bit difficult to hear the responding councils.
Could everyone please speak up? I've been starting to hear also, but I thought it was just me. But okay, if you're on the same issue, let's speak up. Thank you. And thank you for telling us promptly. Never a problem. Interrupt us, no problem.
Thank you. There was a point in time at which Commander Minor was put on administrative leave during the suspension. I'm sorry, that's my question. Commander Minor was placed on suspension while this matter was going forward with the IA investigation, is that right?
Yes, we always place people under investigation for integrity violations on administrative suspension pending investigation.
That was not an ad hoc decision in this case. That happens with every integrity violation that's under investigation, is that right?
That is correct.
There has been a lot of talk in this case about Lieutenant Bonnet. Have you ever personally spoken with Lieutenant Bonnet about the situation or about the discipline or investigation of Commander Minor?
Not this.
You have spoken with Lieutenant Bonnet, he's a member of your department, but have you been keeping your discussions with Lieutenant Bonnet hands-off with anything related to this case?
Yes, it's true.
And I understand that Lieutenant Bonnet may have made claims of AR-333 or other issues that could have come up in the meantime. For any complaints or investigation or anything related to Lieutenant Bonnet, have you or IA participated at all in that investigation?
Not in the investigation, but I did meet with him at the end of the investigation to go over the results.
Okay. I understand that Lieutenant Bonnet made a claim of retaliation against a Lieutenant Hayes, I think.
Please speak up.
I'm sorry.
You tailed off. I didn't hear you.
Sorry. Can you tell us just very briefly that Lieutenant Bonnet did make a claim of retaliation at some point in the last year and a half?
I believe that you mean Captain Hall,
Captain Hall, thank you.
and that's the one I met with him about the conclusion of that investigation. HR actually did that investigation, conducted that investigation, they had no involvement.
You have specifically not participated or allowed or had IA participate in the resolution of any claims made by or made against Lieutenant Bonnet in the last year and a half. Is that right?
I can't sit here and tell you that HR didn't reach out to IA for some information during the course of that investigation, but I clearly did not.
Okay. HR reported their findings to you following that investigation, and you did not disagree or overrule any of those findings.
That is correct.
And Lieutenant Bonnet's claim of retaliation, HR found was not sustained. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
If Lieutenant Bonnet had any concerns at all, what whatsoever with respect to retaliation for speaking with Commander Minor or appearing as a witness in this case. Is that something that you would want brought to your attention
Absolutely, yes.
for investigation?
That's correct.
Other than the complaint that Lieutenant Bonnet made against, and I apologize, I forgot, was it Captain Hayes?
Captain Hall.
Captain Hall.
I think it's a commander.
I'm sorry, you're right. We change our rank, we change our language sometimes. We talk about language issues.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other than the allegation that Lieutenant Bonnet made against Commander Hall, have you ever heard of any complaint from Lieutenant Bonnet related to his participation in this proceeding?
I have not.
Do you want Commander Minor to have a full and fair opportunity to participate in this hearing and have any witnesses that he wants to have appear?
Absolutely.
Chief Pop told you that while Commander Minor was on administrative suspension, he reached out to you for permission to speak with Commander Minor. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, I do.
Is that something that Chief Pop did?
He came to me and told me that, I don't know, Aaron reached out to him or he reached out to Aaron, but he wanted to talk to Aaron, and I said, that's fine. I did tell you to be careful because I know these proceedings are going to take place. I said, but yes, you can certainly talk to Aaron.
And sometimes when police officers, just in other cases as a matter of policy, are placed on administrative suspension, there are conditions of that suspension that require them not to speak to or contact other employees. You did not place any restrictions like that on Commander Minor during the entirety of the time that he was on suspension, is that right?
I believe that's correct. I have no recall of that.
To your mind, have you done anything that you can think of that would chill or harm Commander Minor's ability to fully participate in this hearing today? You agree with me that this is an unfortunate situation?
It's a terrible situation.
Your hope throughout this process was that this could somehow resolve without a termination decision for Commander Minor.
I think my actions speak for it, yes.
You've had the opportunity to listen to a few days of testimony from other witnesses and investigators talking about mistakes that they've tried to correct or things that they wish that they had done better. And you've heard some questions by Commander Minor's attorneys and challenges that they've brought. Given anything that you may have learned in this hearing, do you have any doubt whatsoever that the integrity violation should be sustained against Commander Minor?
Fortunately, I have no doubts.
For all of the reasons noted in the IA investigator report
That is correct.
and under all of the parts of the general orders that were part of Commander Minor's termination.
That is correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. It's now 10:26. We'll take a break until, excuse me, 10:40.
Mr. Savalek, see you've got scheduled 2¼ hours. And I'd just like to place on the record, I don't want to interfere with your necessity of you getting a record that you can use if necessary later on. But for the record now, I want to make clear that Chief Rodbell was or is the representative for the city of Scottsdale. So he has been sitting through all the testimony that has gone forward. So if you can do cross-examination. I've allowed it before for direct to lead the witness. If you can sort of summarize before you get to the question without having to build up the foundation, unless that is something you need to do for subsequent appeals.
Mr. Chairman, I did know that, and I actually adjusted my outline, and you'll see from my very first question that I've taken advantage of his presence so that some of that information will be there. Of course, and I don't think you're suggesting differently, if he wants me to refer him to something specific.
Oh, sure,
record.
certainly. I'll caution the witness, if there's something you don't quite remember, if you're unsure of, please ask. This is, and you were here, this is not a court of law, And as you know, we're not like a jury, because a jury doesn't know when they walk in. We have read, we just read all these materials. It's generally. Okay, anything before you, Mr. Smith?
There is one more thing for the record that I think it's important for the board to know, and I actually just realized that my friend to my left didn't explain this to you as well, and this is our other concern. So I regularly represent police officers throughout the state of Arizona. Integrity issues, so they're providing sworn testimony, and the chief, even though he's going to retire in December, still has an AZPOST certification. A grounds for revoking certification is providing false testimony under oath, which is, I think, another reason why Ms. Day and I try to provide foundation. Just, we're conscious. I don't want to trip anybody up for inadvertently creating an issue under oath, because as the chief would admit, that's taken very seriously by the AZPOST board as well, so it's another foundation.
I ask you, the chair of this, but, let's not elevate it. Take into consideration that I'm not knowledgeable of what you need to do for your other appeal, if necessary, okay?
Right.
Okay, let's take a break now. Eladio and I apologize. Let's go to 10:45.